provision. So I now call on Deputy Paul Murphy to move the motion.
I so move.
And you have 20 minutes speaking time, Paul.
Thanks very much. Sharing with Gino and Mick Barry, 6, 4 and 10. First of all, I want to really thank and pay tribute to the campaigners who have been able to join us in the gallery today, and the many campaigners who are at home and are unable to join us today but are watching online or on Oireachtas TV or wherever else. Their perseverance, their strength, their courage to keep fighting for their children in the face of adversity is what keeps this issue on the political agenda, and which ultimately means that we will be successful. We need to just really keep it up. I think it is undeniable that how children with additional needs are treated in this state is a national disgrace. I think it's such a disgrace, and I'm confident of this, that in years to come, a Taoiseach will be sitting over there making a state apology for how these children were so badly failed by the state. The problem is that isn't much use. It's not much use when we are where we are today in 2024. It doesn't do anything for the almost 10,000 children who are overdue waiting for assessments of needs. It does nothing for the 110,000 children who are waiting for necessary interventions, necessary therapies. It does nothing for the almost 10,000 children amongst those who are waiting simply for a first contact from their CDNT. It does nothing for the hundreds of children who remain without appropriate school places. It does nothing for the 25 families who are forced every single month to take this state to court, to have the state use taxpayers' money to fight against them just to get their basic legal entitlements. It does nothing for the thousands of children who are transported across the state on a daily basis, in the morning, in the afternoon, at a total cost of almost €100 million a year, because there isn't an appropriate school place locally for them. We could stop all of that now. Instead of waiting for a humble, very sorrowful apology in the future, we could actually act on some of the things that are contained in the motion to stop leaving these children behind. There's a very moving piece in the Irish Examiner a couple of days ago by a journalist, Joe Fogarty, who's speaking about his own experience with a daughter with autism. He writes, a hearing test just before her second birthday in 2020 didn't show up any issues. The following year, we applied for an assessment of need, and in September 2021, secured a cancellation appointment. It was one of the infamous 90-minute meetings that lasted less than an hour. The report produced by that review team found that she needed to be assessed for autism. Her service statement, which was to follow the report within a month, we had to seek through an upheld complaint and a subsequent appeal when that complaint initially went unheeded. We didn't receive it until May last year. Almost 3 years on from her preliminary assessment that found Grace required the aforementioned interventions, she has received none of them from the CDNT except for the assessment which diagnosed her autism, something we also had to fight for so she could access a preschool suitable for her needs. That is not an unusual story. It's an extremely common story. I have so many parents contacting me who I'm in touch with who precisely are in this. I was just talking a moment ago to a woman who first had contact in 2020 and has been told won't get any services until 2026. Multiple thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of families waiting for necessary interventions. And the question, I think, we can all say this is terrible, we can all say this shouldn't happen, and this is what we'll hear, but the question is why? And at bottom, and this is what the government will not admit today, at bottom there are political choices. You look how hard this state, under Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, fought for years for the rights of Apple, one of the richest, most powerful corporations in the world, for their right not to pay any taxes. And contrast that with the lack of resources, the lack of struggle, the lack of fight for the most vulnerable children in our society. A series of horrific political choices. The choice not to have appropriate school places in every single school, not to have a special class in every school. There are schools that have said, we're happy to have a special class and simply cannot find the staff. The massive vacancies in the CDNTs right across the country. One of the very impressive campaigners I have met through this work compiled a full list, every CDNT in the country, through FOIs, to establish the number of vacancies. And it's absolutely horrific. We have it, some of the highlights or lowlights in our motion. Average vacancy rate of over 30% nationally, rising to around 40% for occupational therapists, 70% for dietitians, 70% for play therapists, and particular problem spots in particular CDNTs, like Chamber House with a 50% vacancy, like St Columba's in Crumlin with a 60% vacancy rate. The choice not to have sufficient special needs assistance. I could go on and go on and go on. Final point I'll make is that you would be making a grave mistake to underestimate those families who were affected. To underestimate their will to go to public meetings, to mobilise outside the Dáil next week with Cara Darmody, to make this a key election issue. You would be very wise to act now instead of trying to plumose them and hope this goes away.
Minister, so we've had this debate continuously over, I say, since my time in here, and I've been here 8.5 years, and unfortunately we will continue to have that debate until this issue is resolved. And it's not resolved by any means. I mean, the brutal truth is that over 120 children in the state have no place to go to, a school place in September. Now, that seems very elementary, that a state cannot provide a child with a school place. And I don't make this personal, you know, but the state, when we're awash with money, somebody has to ask a question. If it's not about money, then surely it's about bad planning. Somebody's got to, is to blame when a child cannot find a place for a school, because these are simple things, and this is having a knock-on effect to that child and to the family. If they haven't got a place, homeschooling is sometimes not appropriate, and so forth. So it's a failure, and I use that kind of, I use that word, sensibly, but the state has failed children when they can't provide them with a school place. And, this has a knock-on effect, not only, as I said, them children, but in terms of assessment of needs, in terms of therapies that goes with the assessment of needs. I mean, you have a bizarre situation where families have to take the state to court in terms of the state breaching the Disability Act of 2005. Laws are made in here, so they're legislated for and they're enacted so, that they work. The Disability Act, in terms of the assessment of needs, simply doesn't work. If families are going via the High Court to bring the state for these therapies and these assessments, then there's obviously something dramatically wrong. Just want to kind of touch on in relation to what answers and what solutions are we saying? I think a number of solutions in terms of the vacancies in the kind of children disability network teams. There's huge vacancies at the moment. And once there's vacancies up to 40-50% in cases, then there's going to be, again, that knock-on effect where people have to wait years in some cases, or if you have the money, you will go private. And these are expensive therapies. So the knock-on effect from the top affects the children, the most vulnerable children in our society. And that's just not good enough. Where this country is awash with money, we actually don't know what to do with the money. But what we can do with the money and the kind of, I suppose, the forbearance and planning is to not allow this to happen. This doesn't have to happen. Children should have a place to go to school. Families should have not to worry at come September to not have a place for their child. So with that, Minister, as I said, with proper planning and choice, because comes to choice, this can be solved. But you know, I don't know if the government have the stomach to solve that, but on paper, when children do not have places to go to and there's a knock-on effect, then obviously somebody somewhere doesn't actually have the kind of stomach to actually solve this.
Barry?
Yeah, I'd like to use my time to try and give voice to the rage and the heartbreak that's felt by parents across the country about this situation that the government have allowed to develop. The people I'll be quoting are people I've spoken to from Cork today. So, Jimmy Lorden, a parent whose son who wants to send for an assessment of need, he's been told he'll have to wait 2 to 2.5 years for the assessment of need. He says, as a parent, it is beyond frustration being met with wall after wall. My own health is definitely deteriorating as a result due to stress, worrying and feeling helpless, essentially. HSE waiting lists of 2.5 to 3 years for autism assessment means early intervention is not an option. And that's even if you do have money. I'm willing to pay €2,500 for an assessment, but there are no private clinics available. The HSE have block booked them to try and clear waiting lists. I asked if I go to the UK to get the assessment, could I use it to speed up the process and access therapies and services for my son? I was told, no, it won't be recognised. So, no public option, no private option, no overseas option. Basically, my only option is to wait until it's too late and early intervention is gone. A Cork mother who's also been told wait 2 to 2.5 years for the assessment for your son told me, what is most infuriating and heartbreaking about having a neurodivergent child in Ireland is knowing that the science is clear, that with early intervention, real progress can be made and that it can have a life-changing impact. And despite this fact, the HSE erases that potential by refusing to provide the resources that can allow our children to thrive. There are more than 10,000 children across the state awaiting for assessment of need. In Cork alone, there are 765, and in my own area of Cork North Lee, 338. Cara Darmody, the 14-year-old schoolgirl from County Tipperary, campaigner for disability rights, met Minister Roderick O'Gorman this afternoon along with her father Mark. I spoke to Mark after the meeting and he told me, the Minister told us that he cannot commit to stopping the HSE from breaking the assessment of needs law within the next 12 months. The Minister, who we respect, doesn't have a short-term solution to the pain and to the suffering for thousands of families. No, he said, the Minister, who we respect, doesn't have a short-term solution, so the pain and suffering for thousands of families continues. The government seemed to be flying blind on this issue. It was not a good day for special needs kids. Cara, of course, is calling on people to unite by assembling in Molesworth Street next Thursday, the 26th of September at 11 a.m. for a rally putting forward the demand for an end to the underfunding of autism and disability services in this budget. And I would call on people to join that protest. I would also put on the record of the House that there will be a protest in Cork on Saturday the 28th of September, assembling at 3 o'clock outside the library in the Grand Parade to support demands of this kind. And I would also urge people in Cork to attend that protest and any other protests that are taking place around the country in the run-up to the budget aimed at putting the government under pressure on these issues. Cara uses the phrase that has been popularised by Greta Thunberg in the climate movement when she says that the government need to act like the house is on fire. And clearly she believes, rightly in my opinion, that they are not. Last night, Minister Anne Rabbitte participated in a debate with a number of Cork deputies here on a topical issue about St Killian's Special School on the north side of Cork City, the largest special school in all of Munster, which hasn't had a therapist since 2019. The school was promised in November of last year by the Minister that they could access €150,000 to hire therapists. That promise has not been delivered on. A pilot has since been launched. They were hoping, expecting to be on the pilot. They weren't chosen for it. Now, last night the Minister told us, and more importantly told the people from the school, the parents, the teachers that were watching in, that there would be a second tranche for this pilot programme of bringing therapists back into the schools. The schools, the 10 schools that will be included in that second tranche will be announced at the end of October. And the only way to access funds to hire therapists will be if you are part of the programme. I think some progress was made in that debate last night, but I would make it very clear we do not want to see a situation where schools are forced to compete against themselves on the private market in order to access therapists later in this year. One of the members of the St Killian's Parents Unite campaign committee, and what an impressive group of people they are, extraordinarily impressive group of people, raised a point at a meeting recently which I think is a very interesting point, and I think it would be useful if it were to be discussed by parents of autistic kids around the country. She said that there are now about 200 special schools in the state, and that it might be a very useful thing if the parents in each of those schools were to elect 1 or 2 representatives and to link up together to form a campaigning committee to put pressure on the government on these issues. I think there's a lot of merit to that idea, and it's why I've mentioned it, to put it out there. I'm going to conclude with a quote that was sent to me by a woman called Linda O'Leary. Linda is the mother of a special needs child in Cork, and I think that she has nailed it with her quote, and I'll conclude with these words. She says, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, in cahoots with the HSE, have systematically over the last decade withdrawn as many interventions as they could for children like mine and forced us into a complete reliance on the private system for what should be basic intervention to allow every child reach their full potential. Between withdrawal of services, making it nearly impossible to qualify for domiciliary care allowance, and forcing hiring freeze after hiring freeze, the state and the HSE have taken our kids' dignity and ability to reach their full potential. And they have left so many parents broken, financially and emotionally devastated with the stress of trying to make up for the state's conscious discriminatory policy-making decisions. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister Naughton, please.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank, first of all, the deputies for raising the issues contained in this motion. And at the outset, I'd like to say that enabling children with special educational needs to receive an appropriate education is a priority for this government. Since I was appointed as Minister for Special Education and Inclusion 5 months ago, I have met with children, their parents, teachers, SNAs, special interest groups who have provided me with invaluable insights and perspectives on the day-to-day challenges and issues, and indeed the successes in special education. Through school visits, I've seen generosity, care and compassion from entire school communities as they support, develop and nurture our young people with additional educational needs. And it makes me proud as an educator to see the progress that we have made in schools in the area of special education, particularly in recent years. Of course, there are very significant challenges. We all know and accept that, and I want to reaffirm my commitment as Minister to continuing to work to ensure that families and schools are supported. I'm pleased to have the opportunity today to set out the Government's position in relation to the education-related aspects of this motion and to outline some significant measures that we've put in place to ensure that children and young people are supported to achieve their potential. Regarding the issue of the availability of school places, I understand and I regret that there are still children today who have not yet secured a school place for this school year, and some families and students feel that our system is not working for them. This is not acceptable. It is not fair that families are put in a position of feeling that they have to fight for the right to education for their child. I am absolutely committed to improving the system we have and providing the supports needed to help every child thrive and prosper within our education system. And I think it's important to state that the system works for many children. Some 250,000 children with a special educational need are accommodated in our mainstream schools with supports. Around 28,000 children are either in a special class or a special school. We have provided 408 new special classes and 4 new special schools for this school year in Meath, Kildare, Wexford and Limerick. And since this government came into office in 2020, over 1,300 new special classes have been provided, bringing the total to 3,300. And while there is spare capacity in the system, the problem is that capacity isn't always close to where children live. And throughout the summer, the Department and the National Council for Special Education, the NCSE, have worked with schools to provide further special education places. The NCSE has been provided with an additional budget of €13 million, so an increased number of special education needs organisers, or CNOs, can work to support schools and to support families. The NCSE's work to provide additional places has focused in particular on areas in North Dublin. And I can confirm that additional special classes and special school capacity has been secured and places have been offered over recent days to students, and that will continue to be offered over the coming weeks. And it is important now that the schools move quickly to offer the available places to these children. The NCSE plans for places based on children known to them, where a parent has made contact to advise that they have a child in need of a place. However, there is an information gap. The NCSE is not always made aware of children in need of a place. In some cases, this has resulted in new classes being populated by children already in a school and not by children awaiting a place who are known to the NCSE. While the sharing of information has improved, more work is needed in this area. And that is why I have asked my department to develop new guidelines to ensure that the NCSE has information on all the children seeking a special education placement, regardless of where they live. I know that pressure for places is extremely high in some areas, and that is why I have established a new task force for Dublin 15, which will work to ensure that sufficient special educational placements will be provided for the next school year and beyond. This group will examine better ways to establish the level of need in the area so that school places can be provided earlier, giving families that certainty and avoiding the unnecessary stress. Parents are telling me they're applying to 10, 20 schools. Parents shouldn't have to do that. What we want to do here is this group needs to examine a common application system that could be introduced to reduce the burden on parents, where parents would only have to apply once. These measures will help to give the NCSE a clear picture on the number of children in need of a place and thereby allowing that better planning. Once the concept is developed for Dublin 15, I expect that a national system will be developed. I met with Don Mahon, who is the new task force chairperson, in person yesterday, and I outlined my aims for this new task force. The task force will be contacting stakeholders, including parents, school principals and patrons, to secure nominees to sit on that task force, and they will begin their work very shortly. As part of these efforts to identify and meet the need for special educational places earlier, there also needs to be better communication and information sharing between the HSE and government departments, where children present with conditions that impact their education or when they are not meeting their developmental milestones. All of this information needs to be shared earlier on a child's journey so that when they come into the school and education system, it isn't a mystery in relation to children with additional needs. I welcome the work being done by my department and the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth to share information on children in the early years sector who are receiving those additional supports. This will allow for the planning for special classes or special school places to begin not months in advance, as currently applies, but years in advance. I want to assure families that no efforts are being spared to ensure that special class places are provided for this year. I chair weekly meetings with the NCSE and my department to secure places, with ongoing engagement with schools and patrons. Most schools are helpful in providing special class places. However, a very small number have to be encouraged and in some cases instructed to open special classes using legislative powers which were introduced in 2022. These powers allow the NCSE to compel a school to accept a child with special educational needs. This power was exercised twice this year. To be absolutely clear, I will not hesitate to instruct the NCSE to use these powers if a school refuses to accept a child in need of a place. We are all aware of the increased prevalence of disabilities such as autism. We know that children have different abilities and they learn in different ways, and some may require more help than others. We must and do plan for this to provide children with a place and a clear pathway through our education system. This is an investment in our children's future, with €2.7 billion a year, a quarter of the education budget allocated, giving children the supports they need as early as possible. That is vital, and ensuring timely and appropriate provision of school places is the first step. I also recognise that additional supports are required for children with special educational needs, and in that regard there are now almost 15,000 special education teachers and 22,000 SNAs working every day in mainstream schools to support children and young people and their learning. We've also progressed other types of support for children in schools, and I was particularly pleased in June to announce the establishment of the Educational Therapy Support Service, a service designed to build the capacity of teachers and school staff to provide as effectively as possible for the needs of students. This service will see therapists working in classrooms with teachers, and while the service will initially comprise of 39 therapists, it's my ambition to build this service over time to ensure that schools across the country will have access to the service. Deputies will also be aware of a more recent announcement relating to the provision of therapy services in special schools. In conjunction with the Minister for Education and the Minister for Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, the programme will be provided by the HSE in 16 special schools, supported by the NCSE. The purpose of this programme is to provide the effective delivery of in-school therapy supports to children and will supplement existing services being provided by the HSE. Therapists will work on-site in schools for the full duration of the school day and of the school year. School selection is based on where children with the greatest need for supports are based and where appropriate resources are not currently available to meet those needs. The number of children in the special school and the profile of the need of those children will determine the therapy supports to be provided. I hope to expand this pilot so children receive the supports they need. And while the provision of appropriate therapy services is extremely important, I also recognise the importance of supporting students' transitions into and from school settings. The recently launched National Strategy and Action Plan for Lifelong Guidance is about helping people make better choices about their education, their career and life choices through information, advice and guidance counselling services. And for the first time, guidance supports are being provided in special schools. In addition, my department is working to support children as they transition through our education system from early childhood to primary to post-primary and further education and training and higher education, or whatever that transition may be for that child. This is part of our commitment to the comprehensive employment strategy for people with disabilities. We've instigated a pilot programme to improve access to and opportunities for post-school options, with 40 special schools taking part this school year. A second pilot transitions programme is in collaboration between my department and in Walkinstown, the Association for People with an Intellectual Disability, which is currently engaging with and delivering its existing peer ability programme in 10 schools in Louth, Dublin, Westmeath, Cavan and Cork, supporting 170 students in their final 2 years in school. And finally, I would like to refer to the Towards Inclusion model. The overarching purpose of this programme is to provide for collaboration between mainstream and special schools in teaching, learning and assessment practices. The programme seeks to break down the barriers between specialist and mainstream provision, to allow for conversations at local level around inclusion and opportunities for collaboration. Towards inclusion, it may be viewed as a foundation block in work being undertaken to develop an inclusive education system. I think it's fair to say that despite the many challenges facing the education system, we are making progress. I recognise and I accept that our system isn't perfect. Collectively, however, I am committed to working across government to make children's lives better.
Thank you, Minister. Now, given the importance of the matter, I thought it was appropriate for us to allow the Minister to go over time to comprehensively deal with the matter. Deputy Boyd-Barrett, the floor is yours now, sir.
Minister, the efforts and the programmes that you're talking about may make some differences, but really I think I wish that the parents of children and the teachers were here responding to what you're saying rather than me, because they're the ones who know how it's failing their children. And how, despite all the efforts, the promises, the programmes, and as Gino Kenny said earlier on, the debates that have been happening on this issue for as long as I've been in the Dáil, every year we find parents at their wits' end, unable to cope, meeting barrier after barrier, on waiting lists forever. Them and their children. One waiting list after another. Waiting lists for school. Waiting lists for assessments. Waiting lists for therapies. Therapies that often just never come. I was talking to Pamela beforehand, who was talking about CHO 7. Nearly 6,000 people waiting for assessments, which they're legally entitled to. Absolutely critical to get those assessments, because if you don't get that assessment, and then the therapies that flow from it, from the moment the state fails that child's life is being impacted potentially forever. And there's 6,000 people, and Pamela tells me that between January and May in CHO 7, how many assessments were done? 22. 22! It's unbelievable. Charlotte, who's up there, whose daughter Kyra, I think, Kyra, excuse me if I pronounced it wrong, Kyra, whose young daughter has had 3 assessments, but isn't going to get her first therapy till 2026. She had to apply to 32 schools. 32 schools. Now, and I will go on about people in all these different, Rachel, who's up there, who briefs me on this on a regular basis, who has her own son with special needs, and she would just say it's just abuse. It's just abuse of the children, the neglect. And in fact, when the Children First guidelines were first drawn up, and then we had a referendum to put children first, the Children First guidelines were very clear that if children didn't get the supports that were necessary and the resources to give them equality, and to put them first, to cherish all of the children equally as was promised in the proclamation, that it was a form of abuse, it was a form of neglect. And it is abuse and it is neglect by the state. And people then having to go to court to vindicate their rights. But even when you get your assessment, you go to court, you still won't get the therapies. There was a woman at the public meeting we ran in Dunleary a while ago who said her daughter was first diagnosed when she was, I think, about 12, and she was 17, and in all of that time she got 2 therapies, 2 meetings with an occupational therapist, in all of that time in between. It's just unbelievable. And then I got a briefing from Simon Lewis earlier this summer, you probably know him, detailing the fact that 1/3 of schools, and you've heard this before, but it's incredible after all these years, 1/3 of school actually lost special education teachers this year on this new allocation model. Because you haven't resourced it and you haven't planned for it. And you see, the thing is, as one of the parents, I think it probably was again Pamela when she was briefing us the other day, said, this isn't really rocket science, because we know, we have the CSO, we know how many children roughly there's going to be, or almost exactly how many there's going to be, and we know what proportion of children have disabilities and have special needs. Therefore, there should be school places and provision and resources and supports for all of them. In particular, in a country that has record budget surpluses, that is overflowing with revenues, that has so much money, it literally doesn't know what to do with it. It's putting it away in future funds and all the rest of it. But in the here and now, there's 120 children who don't have school places as we enter into the beginning of the school year, or who have children with special needs, where the state is having to pay, I think it's 70 million a year to transport them to other parts of the country to give them a place, which is totally unsuitable, puts the parents under massive pressure in terms of being able to see their children, because they're having to go somewhere else, or the transport costs, which are way out of their own locality and area. It's just incredible. Or in my area, I could just go through the list. Dunleary Educate Together lost 1 special education teacher this year, leaving only 1 special education teacher left. But because they haven't got a permanent school building, they're in between a community centre and another place where there are prefabs. So they have to have 2. But because of the allocation model, they've only got 1. So they simply can't provide. Or Sallynog and Clyney Educate Together, who have asked repeatedly to have a second autism class. They're one of the schools who want another autism class. There are others who are resisting and saying they can do it, they can provide this class, but the Department of Education won't approve it, even though they've asked for it. And then you sort of, the result of this is stories like this, like Aisling and Mary, who are parents. Aisling is an SNA in Dunleary Educate Together, which is 1 child with special education needs in Monkstown Educate Together, and another one in Sallynog and Clyney Educate Together, because there aren't places sufficient in both schools. Right? So at every level, she's affected. Right, and our children, and then there's others who are on the waiting list who simply can't get in. Dalkey School Project, 1 out of 4 special education teacher posts filled. Monkstown Educate Together, 2 teachers recently left. 1 special education teacher left because of the commute times for the teachers were too much. And the cost of housing and accommodation in the area is too much, so they just can't stay in the job. And as a result, that 1 remaining special education teacher now has to go into a mainstream class to cover the other teacher who's left, who was a mainstream teacher, so the children with special needs lose out altogether. It's a disaster. Now, this can be planned for, should be planned for, because we know the numbers, they don't radically change that much, but we fail to do it. And then we have this firefighting exercise, a bit here, a bit there, but actually we're moving around deck chairs on the Titanic, and we can say the same about the CDNT teams and the CAMs, the massive understaffing and so on of these things, where we need to recruit thousands of therapists, of psychologists and so on, the allied professionals, because we are so chronically understaffed and under-resourced in these things. But there's no urgency in terms of the recruitment, or to address the issues of pay and conditions and housing, or even the issue that was brought to me there recently, I didn't know about SNAs who get injured in the course of their work, and then can't work anymore, but they're not actually given any sort of financial assistance after a period of time, after getting injured doing their work. I mean, it's shocking. Now, we are supposed to be signatories to the UNCRPD, which is about equality. Not that we really should need that, because it's in the proclamation that founded this country, and we are failing to provide that equality. It's as simple as that. We are failing to provide that equality. We're failing even to plan for it, and we're doing so in a situation when we have more resources and more wealth in this country than we've ever had before. And as a result, some of our most vulnerable children are being failed, and their parents at their absolute wits' end. It is not fair. So the government have to use the resources that are available to them to give the rights and equality that every single child in this country deserves, whether it is the school places, the education, the resources, the supports, the health supports, the therapies that they need, housing. I haven't even had time to go into that. How the housing crisis is impacting in particular on children with special needs. I could go on. But it's for the people up here that you owe it to, and to the many, many thousands out there, 100,000 waiting for therapies, thousands waiting for their assessments of needs, and schools and teachers, SNAs and all the rest of it, who are under such pressure, such stress, so demoralised by all of this. We are failing them, and it has to stop.
Deputy Boyd Barrett. Now, we go to a Sinn Féin slot where Deputy Pauline Tully is sharing with 6 of her colleagues, I think. Deputy Tully.
Thank you, Concordia. And first of all, I just want to commend the motion and thank People for Profit and Solidarity for bringing it forward. It's a very comprehensive motion, and it's one that's been discussed time and time again here by different groups bringing it forward, and yet nothing seems to change or nothing seems to improve. And I mean, the government seem to have this approach of reacting to a crisis instead of proactive planning to address the issues. And there's been quite a lot of discussion on securing appropriate school placements here. And it just beggars belief why this happens year after year, why there are insufficient school places for children. You have children going to a preschool, they go there for 2 years, sometimes 3. They're in the AIMS programme, so it's identified already that they have additional needs and that they need support. There needs to be better communication between the preschools and the primary schools, and we need to see the NCSE actually engaging with parents and with the preschools at that stage, and able to advise then on appropriate school placement in the child's community. And that when the child goes to primary school, if they're lucky enough to get an appropriate school placement in their community, they spend 8 years in that placement. The teacher, the principal and the teachers in that school know precisely what that child's needs are and what supports they require. And again, they have 8 years to ensure that there's an appropriate post-primary school place in the community for that child. And yet we come every August and we hear from distraught parents who've applied to up to 20 schools to be refused after refusal, no appropriate school placement. Or they're being bussed miles away to find a placement. It's not fair on the child and it's not fair on the families. So the NCSE, if they should be dealing with this, I don't know if it's a case of under-resourcement. We need more CNOs perhaps to engage with all of the different families with the children who have additional needs. When I was teaching, and I used to engage with a CNO, and she knew every child within her catchment area. She was regularly in contact with their families. The families had her phone number. They could lift the phone and talk to her. I talk to parents all the time, and I say to them, well, have you been in touch with your CNO? And they tell me, what's that? they don't know what a senior is, or they have no contact. That's not good enough. I mean, we need much better communication between all the different aspects of education and with the NCSE, and then obviously with the parents. Prior to progressing disabilities being introduced, special schools had therapists attached to the schools. And it was so beneficial, because not only were the therapists dealing with and helping the children, the staff in the schools were learning from the therapists and the different approaches they were taking to dealing with the children. Those therapists were withdrawn. In some cases, they've been returned. It just beggars belief why you need a pilot programme in special schools when they did exist at one time. And I mean, the benefits are unquestionable, and we need to see therapists back in schools. In fact, we need to see them not just in the special schools, but in our mainstream schools. And there was a very good pilot programme run in, I think it was CHO7, called a School Inclusion Model. It seemed to have worked very well. The therapists were put into the schools to work with them. I don't know if a proper evaluation of that pilot has been carried out, and if so, has it been extended? I think there were plans to extend it, but I think it's a model that needs to be extended to all of our schools, especially the schools which have autism classes or special classes attached to them to support the students in those settings. The CDNTs, I mean, it's not a week goes past that I don't have a contact from a parent around engagement with a CDNT. In Cavan, the CDNT has a vacancy rate of 60%. In Monaghan, it's 40%. I think overall it's over 30% if we take the whole country. And therapists are leaving because it's just a horrible place to work, because they're not getting to do their actual job within the CDNT, because they're constantly dealing with, and they don't blame them, irate parents coming to them looking for services for their child or looking for an assessment of need. So we've almost 10,000 children who are overdue an assessment of need at this stage. We've over 9,000 children who are waiting for their initial contact with the CDNT. I mean, this is a crisis point and needs to be addressed. So what we have are therapists leaving the CDNTs and going into private practice, and then the HSE are paying them big money to carry out private assessments. It doesn't make any sense. They should be working within the public sector. So why are they not? So we need to address that point. Is it pay? The Section 39 pay parity still hasn't been addressed. I'm not saying that's the only issue, it's one of them. Conditions within the CDNTs is another, proper support. I mean, I had a parent in contact with me this week. When her child was 18 months, she requested an assessment. She still hasn't received that assessment. The child is now 4. That's not fair, and I realise I'm going over my time. So this needs to be addressed, and I fully support the motion.
First of all, I want to commend People Before Profit for tabling this motion and allowing us to have a debate on this important issue. Cancorla, I was first elected to the Shannon in 2011, and one of the earliest debates that I took part in was on children's disability services. And all of the challenges that were outlined in that debate and all of the asks that were made of the government at the time are again contained in the motion here today, because nothing much has changed. In fact, the only thing that's changed are the numbers of children waiting. So it's now 10,000 or almost 10,000 children waiting for an assessment of need and 110,000 awaiting for essential therapies. And it's easy to see why parents of children with disabilities would be cynical of politics, because in 2005, people who were elected to sit in this chamber and legislated to confer on children with disabilities certain rights under the 2005 Disability Act. And legally, a child has a right to an assessment of need within 6 months. We decided, the Oireachtas decided on behalf of the state, that this was a legal right that those children had, and that assessment of need would be full, comprehensive, and would set out the health and the educational needs of that child. That never happened. Most children certainly haven't got their assessment of need within 6 months, and as we know, and as the motion points out, every day in the court, parents are going to court to have their children's right vindicated. So we decided as a political system we're going to confer rights on children with disabilities and then ignore it. But worse than that, and in a very cynical way, what happened was the state then put in place a yellow pack assessment of need, changed the standard operating procedure, pretended that they were reducing the waiting list, providing a lesser assessment of need. Again, the High Court examined it and said, I'm sorry, that is not the assessment of need under the Act, and they set it aside. And what have we seen? The waiting lists have gone up since. So I have to say that that was very callous, and that was obviously not a way to treat people with disability. So I don't have much more time, so I'm going to just conclude and say this. You could wallpaper this chamber with the amount of debates that we've had in disability services, but since 2005 we have failed those children, and unless we take a rights-based approach, put the capacity in, rather than trying to take shortcuts and deprive children of their needs, I fear we're going to have many more debates like the ones we're having here and fail many more children with disabilities.
There's lots of failures that this government has overseen, but I have to say the failures in disability services are probably the singular greatest failure, and like all the other failures, what we get from the Taoiseach is sound bites rather than solutions. I can speak, if I can, to my experience of dealing with Monaghan families, Can Corla, and it's a very familiar story listening to other deputies. It's families waiting far too long for assessment of needs. When they get through that particular hurdle, it's waiting far too long for OT appointments, for speech and language therapies, for all the myriad of other supports that their children need. Long waiting lists, waiting times, being moved from one centre to another, no consistency in terms of the times available. Parents then being forced to pay out of their own pocket to get the therapy for their children. Other parents simply not having the money to pay out of their own pocket, and despite assurances previously given, government providing no mechanism for which those families can be reimbursed to give them some hope. County Monaghan, as I've said many times in this House, is one of 2 counties that has no special school, despite it being clearly evident that there is a need for a special school. And what do we get from the Minister's promises of reviews? There is no need for a review. We've no permanent respite services. I, in the Dáil here in June, raised these issues with Simon Harris, and I had one ask of him: would he meet the families affected from County Monaghan? And he committed that he would. And like in so many other issues, that still hasn't taken place. I received an email in August saying that he's trying to find a date in between, I suppose, his festival going. The live reality of these families is that they have to fight every single day, battle every single year. We had a group home in Carrickmacross, promised in 2006, finally built in 2016, opened in 2022, 16 years later. And of course, then the Fianna Fáilers and Fianna Gaelers are showing up for the photo opportunity, nowhere to be seen in the long campaign. Likewise, families battling for a temporary respite, for a full permanent respite centre, got a temporary respite centre, and where, out of the woodwork, the Fianna Fáil representatives come out with their photo opportunities and their videos and all the rest of it. I have to say, Ministers, the parents of children with disabilities in County Monaghan don't need TDs or Oireachtas members who will be there on the good days. They need this House, all elected representatives, to be there on the good days and the bad days, and to ensure that we end the bad days by ensuring that in the first instance we recognise that families of children with disabilities have been treated disgracefully, and it needs to stop, and we need to change the system.
Listen, Minister, there's absolutely no aspects of supports for children with additional needs that is working. Absolutely none. No section of it. I brought a letter which was given to me by a constituent of mine just before the summer recess, which confirmed there was 72-month waiting lists for services at the CDNT in Dublin 15. 6 years waiting list. Absolutely and utterly shocking and shameful in this day and age. The parents stood outside this building here just before that recess, campaigning for school places. They met with yourselves, both of you, on several occasions, and they were assured that there would be, first of all, that the NCSE would have their details, that they'd be in regular contact, and they would help get them a school place. And turns out it's not quite what happened for all of them. And what was feared at the time was that some would get places, but some others wouldn't, and that has come to pass. There are about 120 children across the state with no school places as we speak, and that, unfortunately, these children have been let down time and time again. And I was contacted by the parents who did get school places over the summer, and they were absolutely exhausted, but they were joyful that they got school places, but they were deeply angry because they knew that there were others who were not going to get school places. They stood side by side with the parents, and some of them are here today. And they will continue to stand side by side with them to ensure that every single child, that not a single child is left behind. And I think what's really shameful about all of this is that this is being predicted. And I stood in 2019 with a load of hundreds of people in the Tyrrellstown Carlton Hotel. We were campaigning for a special school, the Daniel Special School, which eventually opened. But one of the key demands at that time was, this cohort of students are going to be sorted, okay? But let's not forget the ones who were coming behind them. That was in 2019. And in every single year, those children have been let down. Every single year, despite promises that that wouldn't happen. Because the NCSE and the government failed to plan. Now, I'm glad to hear in your statement that there is a task force. I'm glad to hear that, and I'm glad to hear that parents are going to be involved in it. But do we really need a task force? Really? You know, I think it's a failure of everybody who's been involved in this service over the years. If we can't get a simple thing of children who need a school place, schools, and let's get them in. We're paying people extremely good wages to do their job. I think they should be doing it. And I find it incredible that we have to set up a task force to do that. But let's give them the time, let's give them the energy. They don't have much time. September 25 is coming to us. But I just want to mention as well, Daniel School, 12 school places. They were promised a school building which is supposed to come in before Christmas. There's also an issue around the HSE and the WT hours that were allocated to them. I will send you a letter on. I would ask you please to have a look at that and maybe have a chat about it soon.
Thank you. In my brief time, I'll cut straight to the chase. First, I just want to thank People for Profit and Solidarity for bringing this through. I listened to a lot of the speakers here. I listened to the Minister's opening statements and stuff. Last year, June 23, we as a committee set in an autism committee and we produced the final report. And in fairness to it, there was 109 recommendations on that. The blueprint for success is there. There's 83 or 87 more of those recommendations to be implemented, but it deals with everything from school transport to respite care to summer provisions, you name it, it's there. So the actual blueprint is done by an autism committee of all parties and none. So I do recommend that the government even look at that and say, well, there's your blueprint. The assessment of needs, I'm not even going to touch on it because it absolutely disgusts me, and what the HSE have done to get through the loopholes is absolutely sickening, and they should be ashamed of themselves. But you mentioned, Minister, and your thing about planning and advanced planning and stuff. We all have a constituency dashboard. We have all the information every time there's a census comes out. I can go into my constituency in East Cork. I can go out to Ballyhooly or Ballinacurra, and you can get up on how many children have autism, what their age groups are. You can forward plan for 5, 10, 15 years. Deputy Tully mentioned it a while ago. You know, when they went to baby school, then they went to primary school. They're setting out the chart already. So I hate when we have to talk about the lack of services for people in this country, because those that are the most vulnerable are the most that have been left down, and families are absolutely stressed off their head. And I've finished on this. School transport, disability transport has been an utter shameful disgrace here again this year, and I'm black and blue from raising it since 2016. So again, I congratulate the party for bringing this motion forward. Thank you.
Minister, it has been said already, and I want to commend Solidarity and People for Profit as well. But let me speak about a young boy in my own county by the name of Josh. A local special school could not take him on the basis that his needs were outside of their remit, as his condition was turned moderate to severe. Incidentally, this is the school that his brother also goes to. Firstly, this contradicts the department's notion that a child's designation should not be a reason for a child not being accepted to a school. Anyway, another school was eventually identified to his mother, Sabrina, but the fact is that the surroundings in which Josh would have been placed were wholly unsuitable. It's just a room. It has windows which are easily accessible. Josh himself is a flight risk. It's near a road. It is no quiet area, no sensory garden or any other additions needed to make it any way suitable or acceptable to him. There is also a deficit in the teacher and SNA to pupil ratio. It's wholly unsuitable, and this school is effectively being forced to use this unsuitable room to cater for the demand that you haven't provided for. Additionally, the parents were told that the school will only get funding to make it suitable if Josh actually goes to the school there first. His parent says that one experience of those surroundings would ensure that he'd never tolerate any suggestion of returning. Minister, why is the department doing this backwards? Why can't you ensure schools have the facilities to take the children first, rather than forcing children into unsuitable spaces before they are made safe? It defies logic. And why couldn't the first school Josh's parents applied for be facilitated, which would be more suitable anyway? And why won't you engage with the family about this? Sabrina also met with the Taoiseach recently. He made all the right sounds, but there's been nothing from him since, from his office or anybody else. I appeal to you to engage with the family who have no school to send their son to and who are being ignored by the department. I also appeal to you to revise this wholly inappropriate measure of forcing a child into unsuitable surrounds before any move is made to improve it. I have the family details here, and I've also emailed them to you. I want to remind you that you said that any family associated with the NCSE would have a school place by September. You claim you're committed to improving the situation for families. Please do the right thing for Josh and his mother Sabrina and all the other families that are affected. Gormila Margaret.
Minister, I have just been sent an email. It's from Scoil Bríde in Sheila, which is in North Louth. My main worry is that we have an additional school accommodation application submitted to the Planning and Building Unit of the Department of Education since October 23. This application was put on hold after the sanctioning of our 2 autism classes due to the fact the department had pulled the provision of modular buildings for the 2024-25 year. We are sanctioned for a second autism class, and I am anxious for the accommodation for this class to be provided given the huge need in our locality. You can imagine how this goes on. Look, it is the fact that this has been sanctioned that needs to happen. There needs to be communication, and there's a huge issue in relation to the school building programme. If we could have that addressed, and at least we would be able to provide added resources for those with disabilities, for those with autism in that particular part of my constituency, I would really appreciate it. Look, people have already spoken about the issues that exist around the assessments right through to the therapies and what children, what families cannot get. We all know, and ministers, we've both spoken about the school inclusion model and the absolute necessity to put the service, to put the therapies where the need is. While we may need medical bespoke solutions for other children, this could deal with an awful lot. We've all talked about assistive technologies, and I know that there's been a hold up sometimes from the HSC in relation to this, and whether we're talking about RPM or AAC, we need to see it. Minister Rabbit, I sent you, I think, a message in relation to a child development clinic, and this is the idea of kinesiologists and basically advanced services that have been used. It's almost like occupational therapy and speech and language therapy on steroids that has had a huge impact in relation to children. I think these are the sort of things that we really need to look at. And then I've spoken before, Minister, obviously in relation to my school, the Education Amendment Bill, and the idea where parents and kids with disabilities, there would be the possibility of a 2-year run-in for the school. So the school would be able to get all its ducks in a row and ensure that they had the service for that particular child. But look, we know we need to get the best bang for buck for our children. We know that even if we improve workforce planning from here on in, it'll take 4 or 5 years before we have all those OTs, all those SLTs, all those psychologists in place. So what we need to do is ensure we have a better service, and we ensure we can give the best service as we strive to fill all the absolute necessary roles. And we've been talking about this forever, but we really need to see delivery for families out there.
Deputy Duncan Smith, please.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle, and I'd like to thank People for Profit Solidarity for this comprehensive motion on this most important area. As Deputy Cullinan said earlier, we could paper the walls of the Dáil with debates we've had on disability and special needs provision, and the figures are stark, they are huge, and they are shameful in terms of assessment of needs. Just under 11,000 children awaiting assessment of needs, 110,000 awaiting essential therapies. But within all these figures, there are individuals, and there's people and children. And I want to talk about Frankie Edgeworth, a beautiful boy in my own constituency, an autistic boy, 5 years of age. He can't get a school place. 30 schools have turned Frankie down for application. That is extremely disheartening and worrying for his parents, Shauna and Darren, both of whom suffer with two separate very serious conditions, one a nervous system and the other a functional neurological disorder. This is a family in intense need. But not only has poor Frankie not been able to get into a school, he has been refused 43 play schools or creches in his preschool years. So for a child who is already starting from a difficult position, he didn't get the early years education that many others can get. And his parents feeling he's already behind before he starts his formal primary education, is now not even getting his formal primary education as he approaches his 6th birthday. Unfortunately, Frankie is not alone. That is why this motion is so important. That is why this issue is so prescient at the moment. The provision of autism classes in our education system is so far behind where it needs to be. We've 3,300 primary schools in this country. Only 1,028 of them, that is a third, provide autism classes. Many times they are being provided due to the vigour, the interest, the desire of the principal or teaching staff there to deliver it. But we don't have a statutory basis for the provision of autism classes in all schools, or at least the vast majority. We may be able to accept that in some small cases a school may not have space or may be too small, but the fact that only a third of our primary schools have autism classes or non-autism neurodiverse classes is not good enough. For those that are providing them, they are meeting a huge responsibility in each community, and they are under huge pressure then from they've provided classes, they're providing help and support and education to autistic children. So then the pressure comes on from parents, understandably saying, look, I want to get my child into that school. They're providing a really good service, and the secretaries and the teachers and the principals and that school is feeling that pressure, and they want to provide more classes and they can't. And they're being held back from doing so. There's also, within certain communities, there is an inequality or an inconsistency in provision. In my area of Malahide, for example, there's no primary school has an autism class, yet the secondary school has 2. So, as we all know, admission policies are becoming more geographically based. They're tighter, at least in the Dublin and the Greater Dublin area, they're tighter geographies. So you have children now who, let's say, grow up in an area like Malahide, can't get into an autism class in Malahide, so they have to go outside Malahide to find an autism class for their children. But when they want to then get into the autism class in secondary school, they can't get in because they have gone to a primary school that's outside the catchment area. These are the fixable administrative problems and issues that can be fixed in order to make things maybe a little easier and to make more sense to families who are looking to provide and deliver education for their children. We know, and I said it last night in the debate, we have been told that the recruitment embargo has been lifted. They are just empty words. The recruitment embargo in the HSE has not been lifted. We have huge lists of vacancies in disability network teams up and down the country, and when they're being asked to fill, they're being told, the management are being told, no, you're not allowed. The embargo, in essence, is still in place. We have vacancy rates for therapists, 30% nationally, 40% for occupational therapists, 70% for dietitians, 70% for play therapists. These are frontline workers. These are vitally important therapies and therapists, and these vacancies cannot remain unfilled. And if you're going to say you're lifting a recruitment embargo, then please, in practice, lift the recruitment embargo. We've spoken before on the need to ratify the optional protocol on the UN Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. That needs to be done as a matter of urgency. I have no faith that it will be done in the lifetime of this stall. It must be done in the very, very early days of the next government. We could go on and on and on. I think the motion, also calls for the timing of the release of the autism strategy just there in August wasn't good timing. It was cynical timing. There wasn't enough. It should have been done when we were earlier. It should have been done a long time ago, but it should have been done whilst we were in the Dáil and able to discuss it. The 18 programme for commitments, and I'll finish on this, on family carers, and this is the real test. On the 18 programme of government commitments, 4 have received a score of regressive, 6 have received a score of no progress, 5 have received a score of limited progress, 3 a score of good progress, and 0 have had a commitment achieved, and that's from family carers. And that, I think, speaks volumes. And if you take the scores of the government in terms of their ability to deliver in this area, and then you take it and apply it to a boy like Frankie Edward, who I mentioned at the start, that is the reality of failed progress and failed delivery in this area. I fully support the motion. It's an excellent motion. It's comprehensive and details so many complex, difficult areas in disability and special needs provision, and we fully support it. Thank you, Ceann Comhairle.
Carlin, first let me begin by also thanking people for bringing forward a really excellent, timely and powerful motion, but in addition to that, for bringing forward so many meaningful suggestions to enact even half of which would make a substantive difference to the lives of countless people, the length and breadth of this country. And I hope many of these measures will be reflected in the budget when it's presented to us early next month. At the heart of the motion and at the heart of the call is the struggle that so many families have to make every single day just to have a certain vindication of a basic need for their child to be met by the state. At the heart of the motion, but not expressed, is the same courage that's demonstrated by each family, the length and breadth of this country, who time and time again, some have to travel to the Dáil, others have to make emails every single day, get onto their schools, seek out for help to any and every single person just to have a basic necessity of their child met. We are, in many ways, a wealthy country. That is not reflected in the services that we offer as state, and motions like this each and every week is a reflection of that. The Taoiseach, that I was, I believe, said on the radio the other day that there are people in my party, Sinn Féin, PBP, who believe that we are living in a failed state. I don't think for a second any of us believe that. We believe we're living in a mismanaged state, where opportunities for very simple investment, for urgency to the care, are being not so much neglected, but not achieved. And that's all we ask, time and time again. And I appreciate that you might tell us that the wheels of state are difficult and all of those things, but the everyday lived reality of a child in need of an assessment of need or the follow-on care, I assure you, is more difficult. And I think what we'd like to see is a state that is willing to go beyond itself. And that's the heart of the calls that many of us will be making, not just in this motion, but over the next couple of weeks and months. It doesn't feel right to attempt to summarise these shortcomings in 8 minutes. I think disability and special needs supports are in crisis and require dedication and long-term commitment from government, which we will advocate for as best we can in the time available. In terms of assessment of need, the problem for preventing families from assessing crucial assessment of need in a fair and timely manner are systematic. That word systematic is deep and it has meaning, but it's not my word. They're the words of the Disability Appeals Office, as well as the words of countless families around the country who are treated as an afterthought by the HSE. More than 10,000 children are on waiting for an assessment of need, and over 100,000 are on waiting lists for essential therapies. The HSE, of course, has an obligation to uphold the legal rights of children with disabilities. Yet, out of 72 appeals to the DAO received last year, they only got around to processing 44. It's an extraordinary figure. No child should have to wait for a simple vindication of their rights. Under the Disability Act, the HSE must begin an assessment of needs within 3 months of a request and must conclude that assessment within another 3 months. From speaking to countless parents around the country, but also my own constituency of Dublin Central, it would appear that that is very rarely the case. Assessments of need are essential in denoting what any given child will require to thrive in their education and all aspects of their life. The gross disregard of those children and their needs as a priority for the state is an insult to their families who work night and day to give their kids the best. It's an insult to the kids, only to be cast aside as an afterthought for months and often years on end. That is absolutely a disgrace. Forget the Apple money, forget the recording massive budget surpluses that we're told about. These children deserve to be prioritised even if the exchequer was to be half empty. But the exchequer is not half empty. It is, in many ways, we're told, full to the brim, and that adds insult to injury. A wealthy country showing that it doesn't care for its most vulnerable. And I will repeat the phrase, show me your budgets and I will show you your care. 22% of last year's assessment of needs appeal were from families in North Dublin, many of whom live in my own constituency of Dublin Central. They have quite literally and figuratively run through brick walls for the kids. But the treatment of the state fails to meet their legal obligation to support children with disabilities on a regular and ongoing basis. The HSE would claim to be under-resourced because this government and successive governments have ignored the cries of medical professionals and health-focused NGOs. They hear the informed opinion and choose to look away anyway. There are no excuses for the stat save the HSE when we're sitting on surpluses that give our most vulnerable a better life. You know, we hear about rainy day funds, and I hear about putting money away for the future, and you just think, like, is there ever a day when these families are not experiencing unbelievable difficulties? Like, we need massive investments in money, we need massive investments into people who can go into these care professions, and that needs to be reflected in terms of the urgency that the state demonstrates, and an innovation to actually bring people into these professions as well, because we need staff. Children with disabilities deserve equal opportunities for inclusion and participation in their communities and in all facets of their lives, mandated by the conventions and the right of persons with disability, and this mandate is quite simply not being upheld. The Appeals Office for Assessment of Need only had one member of staff working part-time for the majority of last year and had no disability appeals officer for 8 months. No disability appeals officer for 8 months. Can you imagine being a parent, the countless parents who make that phone call for the first time and are made aware of that reality? It's not only farcical, it is in any cruel. The budget for the entire Disability Appeals Office last year was €120,000. €120,000. Look, I think when we're all knocking at doors at the moment, people talking to us about the cost of the bike sheds and all of that, and I appreciate it. But that type of money undermined, when you see €120,000 being invested by the state in a Disability Appeals Office, it does bring into stark focus the reality. It prioritises a lack of compassion that's grossly offensive to those who have to put their lives on hold due to the lack of care they receive. Just over 1,000 out of 3,300 primary schools have autism classes, and only 410 out of 710 secondary schools have autism classes. More than 120 children were left without a school place at the beginning of September. Parents fear that these delays will lead to a regression of their child's development, a fear nobody should have to shoulder because the state isn't sufficiently providing for them. I mean, it's incredibly fear, and I'm sure all of us are getting calls by parents in that same position. And I mean, it's not just a fear, it's a reality. This break in education leaves families hamstrung, often unable to work, left to provide full-time care and teaching in lieu of the Department of Education's misgivings. The experience of applying for school after school and facing rejection over and over is exhausting. The reality is not sustainable for families. The applications for special classes in schools aren't streamlined, often requiring hundreds of pages of submissions, taking countless hours. Often with no end in sight, the equivalent of the pushing a rock up a hill forever and ever is the equivalent of what many families are facing every single day. And this sort of treatment is absolutely not emblematic of the Republic that anybody strives for. Education for no child in this state should be too much for ask for. No child nor a family should have to make the journey to the Dáil just to have a vindication of a right for a child to be educated in an environment that's safe and catered to their needs. In the short time that's left, I'll talk about the SET and SNA allocation. The insufficient number of special education teachers and special needs assistants only exacerbates this problem. Earlier this year, charities such as As I Am, Down Syndrome Ireland, Inclusion Ireland wrote to the Department of Education asking for the revised SET allocation model to be paused until those most affected are meaningfully consulted. I have 8 seconds left, so let me just say, later this month we will celebrate for the first time SNA Appreciation Day. SNAs play an absolute vital role in the class, often offsetting the failures of the state. I think it's high time that those people who do such invalued work in the classrooms are valued, both in terms of their recompense, both in terms of terms, and so many areas in which the state has failed. And we absolutely need to do better. Start in 2 weeks' time for the budgets, or maybe it's too late for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Gannon. Now, Deputy Sean Canny, please.
Thank you very much, Cancorla, and I do welcome the motion by People Before Profit here and the opportunity to speak in it. And as a member of the Disability Matters Committee, I think we've heard over the last nearly 5 years from different parents and different representative groups what is going on and the way they are experiencing life living with a disability or with a family member having a disability. And we have it coming into our constituency office. I'm sure every TD, every public representative probably has parents coming into their office where they are caught in limbo and they cannot actually get some sort of guidance or steer on where they should go and how their child should be assessed. I saw it in my own constituency down in Tuam, where the CD&T was opened this time last year to great fanfare, and it has not functioned right since, because we don't have the staff. And parents took to the street last December, before Christmas, because they realised themselves in a family forum that it wasn't just one person, it was every family was suffering. And when I have a parent coming into me who has, with her husband, and she has just come from the GP who has referred her to the mental hospital because she cannot cope with the stress and her child cannot get the services. There's something wrong when we're at that. The biggest problem that comes into my office is the fact that the assessments are not being done. There is what I would call a dressing up of what's being done. They're being registered, they're being this, that and the other, but the assessment and the results of the assessment are not being delivered within the 6 months that legally we're supposed to do. This is what's going on. And I could stay here all day and tell you, Minister, what is wrong. But I do believe that if we're to put things right, we have to have a fundamental change. I thought that change would have come about when disabilities was taken out of the Department of Health and put in with the Department of Children. But now I find that the HSE still have their clause in recruitment, and so the extraction of disabilities out of health has not happened at all. It has been a charade. And I'm sorry to say that, but that's what it is, because the Department of Health are still deciding about recruitment, which is paramount importance. They're deciding about all of these things that I thought we had autonomy in when we're talking about disabilities, and we don't have it. So the extraction of disabilities from health hasn't happened. It has just been another one of these where we set up a new department with a new letterhead and money spent in it. I'm very disappointed in that. The next thing I'd like to talk about is education and schools and special needs schools. And down in Tuam we have a fine new special needs school, St Oliver's, and it has taken years to get the new school in place, but we have it in place. But it's full to capacity. There's a waiting list. We then have other schools in Galway, like Lakeview, which is really, the building physically is not fit for purpose for what is intended, and we just need to get a new facility in place there. We have across my constituency, and I'm sure every other constituency, where you have certain schools have an ASD unit, other schools do not. So you have a child who's separated from his or her siblings because they're going to the mainstream school, and the child has to go to another school where the facility is in place. There's no joined up thinking, and it's harsh, like segregating, I would say, people to say, well, if you're 6 inches taller, you go there or whatever, and you end up separating children. And the best way of trying to give the best opportunity to young children who have a disability is to get them into assessments, get them into an education where they're comfortable and where they're with their family and their friends, and they are then seen to be part of normality. But we try to separate them out because we want to make them different. I think the ACT allocations have been a bit of a disaster, and I think that it is important that we tackle that before we operate school business next year. And we don't just do it like that. We have a proper consultation process so that the special education teaching hours are actually working and are meaningful for everybody. I would also say that I've come across in the last couple of months, and especially the last couple of weeks, the fact that special needs people have got a place in a school, but they haven't got a bus to bring them to school. Because we can't get a bus that will take a wheelchair, or because an operator has stopped the service, or because some other reason or excuse. And what really galls me about that is that when I make a representation, I'm being told by somebody, oh, that's a responsibility of bus Éireann or something else. It's not. It's our responsibility to make sure that the full service is there in place so that children who have been allocated a place in a special school, that they can get there. I have one set of parents who are driving probably 3 to 4 hours a day to bring their child to school, back home again, back again to collect and back home again, because there's no bus with a wheelchair that can take a wheelchair. I think, you know, that's fixable, and it's not money. It's really somebody who will drive this to make sure that it is done right. Lastly, the regional group of which I'm a member will be bringing forward a motion next week, private members' motion, on having a non-means tested carers allowance. And the amount of parents that have given up their work, given up their careers to mind their child and are being denied a carers allowance because their spouse is actually working and is over a certain threshold is a shame on us as politicians in this House. The service that they provide, the commitments and the sacrifices that they make, and we say you're not entitled to anything because your husband is earning money or your wife is earning money. If the parents don't do it, if the state are asked to do it, it will cost 20 billion a year. It is not a cost, it's a real investment to make sure that our children with a disability are cared for in a loving way by their parents, and that the parents are recognised for that. Lastly, I understand that this motion is not going to be opposed today, Minister, and I don't read anything into that, because I take it as tokenism. What I would have liked to see would be a structured response as to how we would actually deal with the issues that are being raised here today. And I know I brought in a bill on autism maybe 3 years ago in here. At your request, I deferred it for a year. It has been buried over in your department in the committee since and has never seen the light of day. That's not the way we should be doing our business. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Thomas Pringle.
I fully support this motion regarding disability and special needs provision and would like to thank PBP for raising this very important issue. Firstly, I would like to highlight the urgency needed in the full ratification of the optional protocol of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The fact that the protocol and amendments to the EPSON Act have been left to languish unaddressed for close to 2 decades is one of the clearest indicators of the lack of care and understanding this and previous governments have for disabled people, the families of disabled children and indeed carers. Secondly, I would like to emphasise the importance of acknowledging the real cost of disability via the abolishment of the means test and welcome the concept of a universal payment. The means test perpetuates poverty and verges on degradation. For example, if a disabled person gets married and their spouse earns over a certain amount, they lose their entitlement. This fully ignores the realities of disabled people and the cost of disability, as well as the barriers to employment. It creates an economic codependency that is detrimental to the disabled person and their family. This is just one example of the way this means test plays out. Needless to say, the means test indicates a lack of understanding of why there is a need for such a support and what the cost of disability truly is. The obstacles that disabled people face on a daily basis are immeasurable. Transport, shopping, accommodation, employment, education. I task anyone who feels that this means test is appropriate to spend one day overcoming these same hurdles. I guarantee that not only would you agree that the means test ignores reality, you would have found new respect and admiration for disabled lives. Similarly, I welcome the proposal to introduce a guaranteed living wage for carers that is not means tested and is constitutionally protected. As with the ignorance to the cost of disability, this government has continually shown that it has no clue as to what role carers actually provide. Means testing carers merely serves to further trap families impacted by disability in poverty. It is a slap in the face to the countless family carers who often have already overcome so much upheaval in their home and work lives. We should be showing carers gratitude and support for the millions upon millions of euro that they save the state in providing state care. We should be thanking carers for the priceless good that they do in caring for our fellow citizens. We should be treating them with grace and courtesy, and not treating them with distrust and making them jump through hoops. Finally, I wish to say that I fully support the other proposals contained within this motion. My time won't allow me to address them all individually. These proposals outline the facts and statistics of the issue, and rightly so, we need clear and quantifiable information in order to be able to address the issues. What I wish to say, though, is that the statistics, the numbers, the graphs and the data must be used to propel us forward in making these vital changes. What must not happen is that we lose sight of the lived realities that have created these facts and figures. Every percentage listed can be distilled to children at home waiting for a place in our education system with their peers. Their parents are begging and battling a system that won't recognise their child's basic human rights. Our mainstream children miss more than 21 days of school, and there is an obligation on the principal to contact TUSLA. Meanwhile, disabled children are going years, entire childhoods, excluded from education, excluded from friendships, excluded from community and excluded from life. We must meaningfully include disabled people in our society. This is as much for our own benefit as it is for theirs. Thank you.
Next, I think it's back to government slot. Sorry, Deputy. Apologies.
No, you're fine. And I welcome the motion put forward by People for Profit and Solidarity on this very important issue. I have been raising, I suppose, the waiting list, specifically in Clare, for the last number of months, and I have the numbers of the first contact and those waiting on the initial contact. So there is still 36 children in Clare that are awaiting that initial contact, and as we know, that is the very basics of support and services that can be put in place. So it's very important that they continue to receive that, at least their initial contact. Also, just to mention that I was actually trying to find out how many SNAs are in schools, and from the PQ response I received, it transpires that that number isn't actually collected, that it's available at a local level, for example, but they have indicated that there are 21,000 SNAs in schools. But anecdotally, I'm hearing from the likes of clinical psychologists, those who train SNAs, also pointing to the fact that they are hearing that some schools are not actually hiring SNAs. So there is still a gap there, and possibly something that maybe you could look into. In respect of CDNTs and the vacancies there, look, I know that at the Disability Matters Committee before the recess that was raised with you then, and also I had mentioned it to yourself in respect of Clare, and at the time there was a lot of focus on whether or not permanent contracts were being offered, and that was something that you had said that had been brought to your attention by others and that you were going to look into. But I think just the fact that we're still here, I suppose, and we have still a lot of vacancies in all of the CDNTs. I know one in Tipperary, for example, where it's the occupational therapist, and I've raised that with them locally, but also then in Clare, a number of vacancies there around that. So I think there is a need to really, and I know you've pointed to a new recruitment strategy, but I think the permanent contracts and those being offered to ensure that those can avail of home security, mortgages, all of that really does need to be considered. Gurmagat.
Thank you, Deputy. And now back to Minister Rabbit.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank the deputies this evening for bringing forward this motion, and I welcome the opportunity to speak to this House to reassure you that this government is fully committed to people with disabilities and their families. I do, of course, acknowledge that there are important challenges that we must address, many of them raised by the deputies in their contributions. And if disability services in this country are to be fully meet the needs and expectations of those at the heart of the service. I'd like to thank Minister Naughton for her important contributions regarding recent developments in the special education sector. The programme for government has seen increased year-on-year investment into disability services, with this year's budget seeing a record circa of approximately £2.8 billion funded for community-based disability services. This funding will help reinforce and support the sector and provide a new and improved services as an increase of £195 million on 2023. Sometimes we forget that when we talk about respite, when I came into post, 55 million was ring-fenced for respite. It's now at 120 million. That is the investment and the weight that I have put on the value of respite. It's also important to note that there has been substantial additional investment into children's disability services in recent years, with funding provided for over 600 whole-time equivalent posts. Notwithstanding that significant investment, I personally know of the frustrations that families experience in accessing the services they need. However, I want to tell you that this evening that the government has listened to the families and is pursuing significant investment and reform as part of the programme of radical transformation across disability services. The HSE is taking a planned approach towards building capacity and addressing the service deficit, informed by the Action Plan on Disability Services that my department published last year. The plan aims to build the capacity of disability support services to meet changing needs, improve timely access to services and strengthen the focus on individual services and support. The action plan will be a key to enhancing services and ensuring that we have a human rights, person-centred approach to both policy and service delivery, requiring concreted with a government approach to disability. In relation to the Children's Disability Services, the PDS Roadmap for Service Improvement 2023 to 2025 provides a framework to improve services for children and their families, and clarifies the commitment of the HSE supported by government by providing high-quality responsive supports and services for children with disabilities. And the roadmap includes a robust suite of 60 actions, with 45 either completed or in progress. And as noted by the deputies, there are indeed many challenges facing children and young people with disabilities in this country. We all recognise that working with children with complex needs is hugely rewarding, but also very demanding. And I need to acknowledge that recruitment and retention of staff is presenting challenges to the HSE and the various lead agencies. And these challenges are reflective of the issues affecting the wider health and social care sector. And this is borne out by the CDNT staff census, which notes an average vacancy rate of 36% across the CHOs, and I use the word average. The HSE continues to explore a range of options to enhance the recruitment and retention of staff to CDNTs, working collaboratively with the lead agencies to market CDNT as an employer of choice in a competitive employment market. 21 of the actions contained in the PDS roadmap are focused on CDNT retention and recruitment targets, including national and international recruitment campaigns, along with the launch of the new therapy assistant grade. Whilst acknowledging the challenges that are faced by children's disability services across the country and similar challenges faced in the special education sector, we must also acknowledge the developments and the investment that have taken place during this programme for government. And we can see the positive impact of these measures in various areas. Funding has been provided in recent years for specific measures to address the AON backlog, £11.5 million in budget 2023 and £5 million in budget 2024. And in the first 6 months of 2024, completed assessments were up by 28%, aided by recently introduced the investment of £6.8 million for the waiting list initiatives. Despite the recruitment and retention challenges across children's disability services, the number of whole-time equivalent working in our CDT is increasing year on year. But I still acknowledge we still have over 700 vacancies. In July, Government approved the prioritisation of funding to support the expansion and training places in priority healthcare areas, including speech and language therapy, occupational therapy and physiotherapy. And working with the Department of Deferris, we plan to increase our places in our OTs, physios and speech and languages over the 2 recruitment cycles by 33%. There were 3,393 children on the CAMHS waiting list in July 2024. Nationally, this represents a decrease of 900 children waiting for CAMHS community mental health services, down from 4,293 in December 2022. The data also shows at the end of July 2024, 94.2% of all urgent cases were responded to within 72 hours. The growth in care being delivered in primary care in the community is reflected in 6% increase in therapy services delivered within community in 2023, with primary care services delivering service to 1,397,000 people. Therapy users in 2023. In August, Government agreed to support the special schools pilot for enhanced in-school therapy supports for 16 schools, developed by my department and the Department of Education, supported by the HSE and NCSE. And I think it's important, Deputy Tully, to speak exactly to that point where you raised, why were we doing a pilot when therapists were already back in there in schools in 2019. It's important to say that in 2021 we secured funding to put back in 81 therapists, but unfortunately the HSE applied the line of aligning to but not in. Aligning to was keeping them on the CDNTs but not putting them back into the special schools. In some schools, therapists were not removed out of, so there is an inequity in our education system at the moment. But in order to ensure that there's good governance and there is good right supports, it is now a collaborative approach between the Department of Education and DCD, the NCSE and the HSE, so as that the children are receiving, that we can actually assess the support that is going in. And it's in therapies that is going into the pilot as opposed to aligning to. And that's a government policy and direction that has been taken. Additional 10 schools will come on board on a phased basis, and the announcement of those 10 additional schools will be in October of this year. The significant benefit to this pilot is that therapists will be on site during school hours. Home-based supports will be provided outside of school hours in the usual way, delivered through the CDNTs. And this will be recorded and tracked to demonstrate that children in special schools are being prioritised. And we need to continue to invest in children's services and special education. And the motion does raise important points. And while we have made significant progress over the last 5 years, I think we all acknowledge how important it is that we continue to develop services so that all children are provided an appropriate level of service. The scale of the challenges in this area is well understood by Government and the HSE. However, substantial and concrete efforts are being made to focus on finding workable solutions to address the issues and improve services and supports for children with disabilities and their families. Personally, during my time in office as Minister for Disabilities, I have seen consistently proactive in my engagements across all of these issues in order to drive reform and improve services. And I am acutely aware that, like myself, no one wants to see a child having to wait 1 year, 1 month or 1 day more than necessary to receive the therapy supports that they need. And I would sincerely like to thank all the deputies who have contributed this evening to the debate and ensure that this government will remain intensely focused on providing the best possible service we can for children and adults with disabilities.
And now, People for Profit, Deputy Bree Smith and Deputy Paul Murphy, 5 minutes each.
First of all, I'd like to thank those in the gallery who've come here today and who consistently campaign for their children and for all of our children, for all of us, by the work that they do. I want to congratulate Greg from Ballymun and his Mrs. Celine, because they have fought like tigers in Finglas and got their son a place when up to the last minute he hadn't got one. Likewise to Nicola O'Dea. I don't think they're here today, but nevertheless we have other amazing people here today, including Hugo and his dad. And Hugo asked me on the way in here, Hugo has special needs, why will the unions not answer my letters? He has written to the trade unions and asked them to help mobilise demonstrations to force this government to do something about special needs. Fair play to Hugo, well done. And I would think you deserve an answer to that question. Why do the unions not answer your letter? Indeed. But I want to approach this from a slightly different angle. You see, Conor Reddy, the councillor who's up there and who led the amazing campaign in Finglas, said to me, Bree, this is about planning and delivery. And the more you look at it, the more I totally agree with him. Now, I know that your speeches are written by civil servants. Sometimes my speeches are written by parliamentary assistants. The minister who left her speech is written by a civil servant. But I noticed she said in her speech, I am proud as an educator to see the progress made in schools in the area of special education. I understand and regret that some families and students feel that the system is not working for them. It's not fair that families are put in a position of feeling that they have to fight for the right for education. It is not a feeling. It is an absolute reality. And it is reality for hundreds and thousands of parents and hundreds and thousands of children. And when she says we are all aware of the increased prevalence of disabilities like autism, well, it's going to increase and be more prevalent in the future. So we want to see a plan. And actually, today's contribution from yourself and from the previous minister who's left doesn't give us a plan. She says three things that jumped out. One, that there's a recent announcement relating to the provision of therapy services in special schools. Two, that there's a national strategy and action plan for lifelong guidance so that people can make better choice about their education. And three, that there's a comprehensive employment strategy for people with disabilities. And four, she speaks about the Towards Inclusion programme. Brilliant, delighted, great. She doesn't tell us how you are going to clear the waiting list of, how many is it, 10,000 who are waiting for assessment of special needs, how you're going to engage the, how many, I have to lose me, let me come to that, how you're going to engage the 375 extra clinicians that the HSC says we need in order to clear that waiting list for assessment of leave. Not a word about that. Nor do we hear, as Richard pointed out, there are 110,000 children waiting for therapies, and there's a 30% overall void in the number of therapists available. You didn't tell us about how you're going to do that. Neither did you tell us about how you're going to increase the spaces in university to train new therapists for the future. That's in our motion. All of these things about have a plan, an immediate plan to get the 375 extra clinicians in, an immediate plan to increase the therapy places in university, an immediate plan to employ therapists and retain them. Look at their work, their pay, their conditions. Can they access housing? Why are they leaving jobs? If we can recruit them, how can we hold on to them? That is the plan we need to see. Otherwise it's lip service, and I know you're not going to oppose this. The government have not put forward a counter motion or an amendment or any of that stuff, so there'll be no vote on this, there'll be no controversy. Who could vote against this? You'd be out of your skull to vote against this, so you're not going to. But what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about the chairperson's bill that was passed and that is sitting waiting in some kind of a laboratory for the committees to look at and never gets looked at? How are you going to deal with these things? And that's what we needed to hear today, was planning and delivery. No more platitudes, no more, oh, it's great and we've done this and this. We're going to announce 16 schools in October and we're working with the Minister for Education with this. Great, lovely. But what we really need is a plan to deal with this as a matter of urgency. And urgency because we daily come across people, and I've recently written to you about one, and she has had a huge amount of help since I wrote. But she came to me when I was a young councillor, looking for services for her child. He is now a big, strong man who beats her up. And she needed respite and she needed care for him. Now she's getting it. But had she not been screaming and almost killed, and me screaming at you, she would still be out there suffering. We need an urgent plan.
Thank you, Deputy Paul Murphy.
Thanks to everybody who participated in the debate. I've sat through many debates like this in the Dáil, and I've heard the Minister's responses in the past. We've heard about the pilot schemes, heard about the task forces, heard about the marginal improvements in what is a horrendous situation. It's still horrendous. If you go from waiting 6 years for an intervention that your child needs to waiting maybe 5 years and 8 months, that is still a horrendous, unacceptable situation. I don't doubt the Minister's sincerity. I definitely believe that she cares. But I do not believe what you said, that the government is fully committed to families of children with disabilities. I do not believe that the government wants to convert any of that care into action that will make a meaningful difference to these hundreds of thousands of families. And I believe that, like, an illustration of that is the government's approach to the motion tonight. I mean, I really think, and this is their regular approach, this is what they do every time now with motions on this issue. They're not opposing our motion, they're going to allow the Dáil to pass it, but like Breed said, you have no intention of implementing it. I mean, there are 17 very, very clear asks here. How many of them do you intend to implement? I don't believe you intend to implement a single one of them. And that's just then the height of cynicism. It makes a joke of this democracy, that you're able to bring in a motion, say we need to do this, and the government's able to let it pass, and the Dáil will officially say these things, but then you don't intend to do them. I'll give you an example. Number 12, immediately ratify the optional protocol of UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. You do not intend to immediately ratify it. Why? Because if you do, then the likes of Greg Lewis or the likes of Charlotte, the likes of people whose children are denied the education that they are entitled to under Article 24 of the UNCRPD, education on an equal basis with others in the communities in which they live, they could take action against the state. So you don't intend to do that. You don't intend to scrap the means test for those on disability allowance. You don't intend to scrap the means test for carers allowance. You don't intend to make sure that they are payments that cover the real costs of having a disability. The budget is a week and a half away. You do not intend to do that. You do not intend, as number 17 calls for, to invest an additional 2.5 billion and a massively expand funding for disability payments in 2025 as the first year of a transformational multi-year programme to end exclusion and poverty for disabled people and ensure that no one is left behind. I do not believe that you intend to implement a comprehensive plan for staff retention across the relevant services, addressing in particular pay and conditions. We all hear these awful stories of people who become therapists because they want to help children, and then they're trapped in this awful situation of managing massive waiting lists, not being able to do what they do, under massive pressure, unable to afford housing, and then leaving, going into the private sector. This spiral, downward spiral. And it relates to the point about the pilot programs in the schools. Yes, it'll be good if we have therapists in special schools. Obviously, that makes sense. Yes, it would be good if we had therapists in every school. Absolutely. But if you're just moving the therapists from out of the CDNTs into the schools, well, then you're going to create an extra problem. The fundamental issue is to address that issue of staffing. And that gets to the point in terms of the barriers, removing all the barriers to further education for those in these professions. That's the question of fees, that's the question of accommodation. We could have these people on our courses and actually relatively quickly would be on the ground assisting while learning, etc. Doubling the number of places available in universities, ensuring that AONs are carried out and recommended supports, ensure delivery of adequate training and support for teachers, SETs and SNAs. We have a programme here which would make a meaningful difference to all those people, and the Dáil will adopt it. We'll say we'll say that this is our position, but it really is the height of cynicism that the government does not intend to do it. I finish with this just to say that the only way the government will be forced to do any part of these is precisely by the campaigning pressure, by the people who are in the gallery today, by all those who are watching, by those who will be outside the Dáil next Thursday. They have to be shamed into it, they have to be pressured into it, they have to be forced into it. It's not right These parents should not have to fight. They really shouldn't. It's outrageous that they have to. They have enough on their plates already. But that is what will ultimately make the difference.
Thank you, Deputy. Now, I want to thank all the deputies for their cooperation. The question now is that the motion be agreed to. Deputies who are in favour of the question say "Tá." Deputies who are against say "Níl." In my opinion, the question is agreed and carried.
Problem solved.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much.